My pilot sister whispered, "Is your husband home?" "Because I'm watching him board my flight to Rome kissing another woman." I froze as the front door opened behind me. I have spent my entire adult life looking for the lie. I am 37 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have worked as a forensic accountant. I track down hidden assets, expose corporate fraud, and find the invisible strings connecting dirty money to seemingly clean hands. My days are spent dissecting financial statements until the truth inevitably bleeds out onto the spreadsheet. You could say that paranoia is practically in my job description. But the funny thing about being professionally suspicious is that you never apply those same investigative lenses to the people sleeping right next to you. You assume your sanctuary is safe. It was a crisp Friday morning in our Manhattan apartment, the kind of morning that feels too perfect to hold any bad news. The sunlight was hitting the marble countertops just right, and the smell of freshly brewed espresso filled the kitchen. I was standing by the island, pouring a second cup for my husband, Harrison. We had been married for 7 years. Harrison was a successful investment banker, a man whose suits always fit perfectly, whose hair was always impeccably styled, and whose charm could disarm a room full of hostile executives in minutes. He was my rock. Or at least, that was the story I had been telling myself for nearly a decade. I reached for my phone as it buzzed violently against the counter. The caller ID flashed my sister's name. Penelope. She was a commercial airline pilot, usually flying long-haul international routes. It was barely 7:30 in the morning, which meant she was likely doing her pre-flight checks. I answered with a smile, expecting her usual rushed hello before she took off across the Atlantic. Instead, there was a heavy, static-filled silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was a trembling whisper that immediately made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Evelyn," she breathed out, her words tight and urgent. "I need to ask you something really strange, and I need you to just answer me honestly. Is your husband home right now?" I frowned, glancing toward the hallway that led to our master bathroom. I could hear the faint hum of an electric razor through the partially open door. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady but threaded with sudden confusion. "He is getting ready for work. He is just down the hall." "Why? What is going on?" The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I could hear the background noise of the airport terminal through her headset, the distant boarding announcements, the hum of the jet engines outside her cockpit window. "Evelyn, that cannot be true," Penelope said. Her voice broke slightly, and I realized with a sudden jolt of adrenaline that she was crying. "I am sitting in the captain's seat of Flight 482 to Rome. I am looking right out the window at the first-class boarding bridge. And Evelyn, I am watching him. I am watching Harrison right now." My brain struggled to process the words. My professional mind, the forensic accountant who dealt in hard facts and undeniable evidence, simply rejected the statement as a logistical impossibility. "Penelope, you are mistaken," I said gently. "It is early. You are seeing someone who looks like him from a distance. I literally just poured his coffee." "No, you are not listening to me," she insisted, the panic in her voice rising. "It is him. I know my own brother-in-law. He is wearing that navy blue custom suit you got him for your anniversary. He has his leather travel duffel. And Evelyn, he is not alone. There is a young blonde woman with him, and he just pulled her in and kissed her before they handed their boarding passes to the gate agent. They are getting on my plane." The world tilted on its axis. The kitchen, the espresso machine, the morning sunlight, everything suddenly felt like a movie set that was about to collapse. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her she was losing her mind, to demand she take a picture. But the words died in my throat. Because right at that exact second, the hum of the electric razor stopped. The bathroom door clicked shut. And heavy, familiar footsteps began walking down the hardwood hallway toward the kitchen. I stood entirely frozen, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white, trapped in a waking nightmare. My sister was watching my husband board a flight to Europe, and my husband was simultaneously walking up right behind me. "Good morning, beautiful," the voice said. It was Harrison's voice. The deep, rich baritone that had charmed me at a charity gala 8 years ago. the voice that had spoken our wedding vows. I slowly turned around, dropping my phone into the pocket of my silk robe, severing the call with Penelope. The man standing in my kitchen looked exactly like my husband. He was wearing the gray cashmere sweater I had bought him for Christmas. His dark hair was styled with the exact same subtle part on the left side. He had the same faint, crescent-shaped scar just above his left eyebrow from a childhood hockey accident. He reached out and took the espresso cup from my hand, holding it with the same unique grip he always used, his pinky finger resting just under the base of the ceramic mug. Everything about him was perfect. But my forensic training, the instincts I had honed over 20 years of detecting fraudulent documents and fake corporate fronts, flared to life like a siren in my head. When you look at a forged financial record, the first thing you notice is not the mistake. The first thing you notice is how impossibly perfect it looks. It lacks the messy reality of genuine human error. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He tilted his head, his hazel eyes locking onto mine with an expression of mild concern. "You look a little pale. Did you not sleep well?" I forced a smile onto my face, drawing on reserves of strength I did not know I possessed. "I am fine," I lied smoothly, matching his casual tone. "Just a bit of a headache. I think I stared at spreadsheets for too long yesterday." I watched him closely. I observed the micro-expressions on his face, the way his jaw moved as he swallowed, the way he breathed. He was a flawless replica. But as he stood closer to me, the illusion began to crack at the microscopic level. His scent was wrong. Harrison wore a specific cologne, a custom blend of cedar and bergamot. This man smelled like it, yes, but underneath it was the faint, sharp tang of a different brand of deodorant, a different kind of body wash. The cadence of his speech was slightly too rehearsed, lacking the typical morning gravel Harrison usually had. He leaned in to kiss my forehead, and it took every ounce of self-control I had not to violently flinch away. His lips felt different. The pressure was different. The temperature of his skin was foreign. I was standing in my own kitchen, looking into the eyes of a complete stranger who was wearing my husband's life like a tailored suit. "Well, you should take it easy today," he said, pulling back with a warm, practiced smile. "I have back-to-back meetings all day, probably will not be home until late. Do not wait up for dinner." I nodded, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Sounds good. I have a lot of client files to review anyway. Have a good day at the office." I watched him turn and walk toward the front door. I memorized his gait. It was studied, careful, practically choreographed. The door clicked shut behind him, and the moment the deadbolt slid into place, the facade I had been maintaining shattered. My knees gave out, and I sank to the cold kitchen floor, gasping for air as a panic attack washed over me. My brain scrambled to create logical columns where none existed. People do not just get replaced. This was not a science fiction movie. This was Manhattan. But the reality was undeniable. Penelope had seen him. I knew my sister. She was a highly trained pilot whose vision and attention to detail were literally matters of life and death. She did not make mistakes about things like this. The man who just walked out of my door was an imposter. A decoy. A highly paid actor brought in to maintain the illusion of my domestic life, while the real Harrison was currently ordering champagne in first class with his mistress, flying toward the Mediterranean. I pressed my hands against the cool tile floor, forcing my breathing to slow down. One inhale, one exhale. The panic began to recede, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. Harrison thought I was just a naive wife. He had forgotten that he was married to a woman who dismantled elaborate corporate conspiracies for a living. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face. I was not going to fall apart. I was going to go to work. I got dressed with mechanical precision, choosing a sharp black blazer and trousers. It felt less like office attire and more like armor. I hailed a taxi on the street, sliding into the back seat and staring blankly at the passing city blocks. The rhythmic bump of the tires over the asphalt provided a metronome for my racing thoughts. As I sat there in the back of the cab, I let my mind drift backward, excavating the history of our 7-year marriage. I needed to understand how we had arrived at a point where my husband felt the need to hire a body double just to cheat on me. When Harrison and I first met, he was not the polished, wealthy investment banker he was today. He was a junior analyst drowning in student debt, working 100-hour weeks just to keep his head above water. I was already established in my forensic accounting career. I was the one who paid the rent on our first tiny apartment. I was the one who bought his first tailored suit for his major promotion interview. I spent my evenings reviewing his financial models, fixing his math, and teaching him how to spot market trends. I practically built his foundation brick by brick. For years, I had viewed my financial and emotional support as an investment in our shared future. I thought it was an act of profound love. But sitting in that taxi, replaying our history through the lens of a betrayal so deep it felt surreal, I realized the horrifying truth. Harrison had never viewed me as a partner. He had viewed me as a venture capital firm. I was a startup incubator that had provided him with the seed money, the stability, and the expertise he needed to launch himself. And now that his personal stock had skyrocketed, now that he had reached the top floor of his firm, the investment had matured. He was cashing out. I thought about the last 3 months. I had been incredibly busy with a massive corporate audit, working late nights and weekends. Harrison had been unbelievably supportive. Too supportive, in retrospect. I remembered commenting to my friend Madeline that it felt like we were finally out of the woods of our usual petty marital arguments. He had stopped leaving his wet towels on the bed. He stopped forgetting to buy milk. He was suddenly attentive, asking me about my day, making me tea before bed. The sickening realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. That wasn't Harrison finally becoming a better husband. That was a hired actor reading from a script, instructed to be flawless, so I wouldn't look too closely at the man standing in front of me. The real Harrison had probably been agonizingly bored by my work stories. The imposter had been paid to listen. The absence of our usual bickering wasn't marital bliss. It was the total absence of a genuine relationship. My chest tightened with a mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. It is one thing to discover your husband is having an affair. That is a pedestrian tragedy. It happens thousands of times a day across the city. But this was a calculated, sociopathic level of deception. He had orchestrated a theatrical production in my own home. He had violated my sanctuary, making me share a bed, share meals, and share intimate conversations with a complete stranger. The taxi pulled up to my office building in the financial district. I paid the fare and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The morning air felt sharper now. The grief that had been threatening to drown me was rapidly evaporating, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. I was done being the grieving wife. I was stepping back into my professional skin. If Harrison wanted to treat our marriage like a fraudulent corporate entity, then I was going to audit him. And I was going to tear his entire world apart down to the last penny. My office was practically empty. It was Friday, a day when most of my colleagues worked remotely or left early for the Hamptons. The silence on the floor was exactly what I needed. I locked the heavy glass door to my corner suite, closed the blinds, and sat down at my workstation. I did not log into my personal banking apps on my phone. Consumer banking interfaces are designed to make you feel secure. They hide the raw data behind pretty graphics. I needed the raw data. I booted up my proprietary forensic software, a highly restricted tool I used to track international money laundering for Fortune 500 clients. I plugged in the routing numbers for my and Harrison's joint checking, savings, and shared investment portfolios. My fingers flew across the keyboard with the muscle memory of a predator tracking wounded prey. The progress bar crawled across the screen, parsing through thousands of transaction logs over the past 12 months. When the final report populated on my monitors, the pattern was so subtle, so meticulously crafted, that any normal spouse and even most standard accountants would have completely missed it. But I wasn't standard. Starting exactly 3 months ago, which perfectly coincided with the timeline of when Harrison's behavior became suspiciously flawless, the financial bleeding began. There were regular, scheduled outbound transfers. Each transfer was for exactly $9,999. I stared at that specific number, my jaw clenching. $10,000 is the threshold at which federal law requires banks to automatically file a currency transaction report with the government. By moving exactly $1 under that limit, the real Harrison was executing a textbook structuring scheme, commonly known as smithing. He was quietly draining our liquid assets right under my nose, relying on the imposter at home to keep me distracted and happy. I highlighted the outgoing routing numbers and ran a reverse trace. The money wasn't going to a domestic account. It was being funneled through a labyrinth of digital wire services, bouncing from servers in Panama to shell companies in Cyprus, before finally settling into an offshore corporate trust registered in the Cayman Islands. A trust named Blue Horizon Holdings. The Caymans are notorious for their airtight privacy laws. Standard subpoenas bounce right off them. Harrison knew my jurisdiction limits. He knew exactly how to hide money where I legally could not touch it. I expanded the search parameters, pulling the history of our shared retirement funds and the equity line of credit on our Manhattan apartment. The numbers that flashed on the screen made me physically nauseous. He hadn't just drained the cash. He had taken massive, unauthorized loans against our retirement portfolios. He had maxed out the home equity line. I opened a blank spreadsheet and began tallying the total stolen funds. $400,000 from the investment accounts, $600,000 from the home equity, $300,000 from the retirement savings, $1,300,000. Methodically extracted, washed, and hidden. He was bankrupting me. The man who had kissed me at the altar, the man whose career I had built with my own hands and intellect, was leaving me with nothing but massive debt and a stranger in my guest room. He was planning to disappear into the European sunset with his young blonde mistress and a massive war chest of our shared wealth. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing numbers on the screen. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He had weaponized his financial knowledge against the very person who taught him the rules of the game. I took a deep breath, letting the anger crystallize into a sharp, diamond-hard resolve. He thought the money was safe because it was offshore. He thought the Cayman Islands firewall would protect him. He forgot that a firewall is just a piece of code, and every code has a key if you know where to look. I picked up my encrypted burner phone and dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. I needed a different kind of expert. I needed Gemma. Gemma arrived at my office an hour later, wearing her signature leather jacket and carrying a heavy aluminum briefcase. We had met a decade ago during a massive corporate embezzlement case. I traced the numbers, and she did the physical surveillance. She was a private investigator who operated in the gray areas of the law, specializing in marital reconnaissance and digital espionage. When I told her the entire story over a secure line, she hadn't gasped or offered pity. She just asked for the building address and told me to wait. She dropped her briefcase onto my mahogany desk and immediately began connecting cables to her heavily modified laptop. "I managed to clone the hard drive of your apartment building's security server," she said, her fingers moving rapidly across her keyboard. I posed as a fire safety inspector. The doorman did not even blink. I leaned over her shoulder, watching as multiple video feeds from my building's lobby, elevators, and parking garage populated her screen. "We need to find the exact point of insertion," Gemma muttered, adjusting her glasses. "If Harrison is paying someone to pretend to be him, that actor has to enter and exit the building. But your doormen know Harrison. They would recognize an imposter, no matter how good the makeup is. So how does the fake Harrison walk through the lobby every day without raising alarms?" We sat in silence, watching fast-forwarded footage of the past week. Residents coming and going, delivery workers, dog walkers. Then, the timestamp hit Tuesday evening at 6:45. The figure of Harrison walked through the revolving glass doors, carrying his usual leather briefcase. "There," I said, pointing at the screen. "That is him coming home from work. He looks perfectly normal." Gemma paused the video. "Look closer, Evelyn. Look at the chandelier light hitting the marble floor." She zoomed in on the frozen frame, magnifying the pixels until they became blocky. She pointed to the shadow trailing behind Harrison's feet. The shadow was falling at a 45-degree angle to the left. "Now look at the woman walking 10 feet behind him," Gemma instructed. I looked. The woman's shadow was falling directly behind her. The light source in the lobby was stationary. It was physically impossible for two people in the same room to cast shadows in completely different directions. My blood ran cold. "It is fake," I whispered. "Highly advanced deepfake technology," Gemma confirmed, tapping a key to resume the footage. The video glitched slightly around the edges of Harrison's silhouette as he passed behind a decorative pillar. "Someone has hardwired a loop into your building's security feed. Whenever the imposter enters or leaves, the system automatically overlays the real Harrison's face and body metrics onto the footage in real time. The doormen see the real Harrison on their monitors. This level of cyber manipulation costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain. Your husband hired absolute professionals." Gemma typed another command, running a facial recognition algorithm against the raw, unfiltered footage hidden beneath the deepfake overlay. A few seconds later, the system pinged, and a completely different face appeared on the screen. "Meet your fake husband," Gemma said, pulling up a background file. "His name is Declan. He is a 32-year-old struggling theater actor living in a tiny studio in Brooklyn. Massive credit card debt, multiple failed auditions, completely desperate for cash. Harrison likely found him through an underground casting agency, paid him a massive lump sum in cash, and gave him a script to play the role of a lifetime." "And the woman on the plane?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Gemma pulled up an Instagram profile, the privacy settings easily bypassed by her software. "Cassidy. 26 years old. She is a pharmaceutical sales representative, but her client list is entirely made up of aggressive hedge fund managers. She has been traveling to Europe a lot recently, and her trips perfectly align with Harrison's mandatory corporate retreats." I stared at the images of Cassidy and Harrison laughing on a yacht in Monaco, posted under a cryptic, untagged account. The rage inside me compacted into something highly combustible. They had thought of everything. The actor, the deepfake, the offshore accounts. It was a masterpiece of marital fraud. But masterpieces are fragile. If you pull the right thread, the whole canvas tears. I thanked Gemma, took a copy of the files, and packed up my bag. It was time to go home. It was time to look the actor in the eye and conduct a lethal test. I walked into our apartment at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. The air smelled of expensive room spray, and soft jazz was playing from the living room speakers. The domestic tranquility felt deeply offensive. Declan was sitting on the velvet sofa, wearing Harrison's reading glasses, scrolling through a tablet. When he heard me enter, he immediately put the tablet down and walked over, offering that perfectly practiced, warm smile. "Rough day?" he asked, reaching out to rub my shoulders. I did not flinch this time. I leaned into the touch, playing my role just as flawlessly as he played his. "Just long," I sighed, dropping my bag onto the console table. "But I want to make it a good night." I stopped by the specialty market on the way home. "I am making dinner tonight." "Oh? What is on the menu?" he asked, looking genuinely pleased. "Shrimp scampi," I said smoothly, turning toward the kitchen to unpack the groceries. "My grandmother's recipe. Lots of garlic, white wine, and massive tiger prawns." I kept my back to him, listening closely for his reaction. There was a brief pause, a microsecond of hesitation, before he replied, "Sounds incredible. I cannot wait." I began chopping the garlic, my hands moving with steady precision. The real Harrison had a severe, life-threatening allergy to shellfish. It was documented in his medical files, and he carried an EpiPen in his briefcase at all times. Even cross-contamination in a restaurant kitchen would cause his throat to swell shut within minutes, requiring an emergency room visit. We had not cooked seafood in this apartment for 7 years. If this man was my husband, he would have panicked the moment I said the word shrimp. But Declan, reading from whatever incomplete dossier Harrison had given him, simply thought he was getting a nice home-cooked meal. I cooked the meal slowly, letting the rich aroma of butter, wine, and seafood fill the entire apartment. I set the dining table with our good silver and poured 2 glasses of expensive Pinot Grigio. I plated a massive portion of the shrimp pasta and set it directly in front of him. Bon appetit, darling, I said, taking my seat across from him. He picked up his fork, twirled a large bite of linguine and a whole shrimp, and placed it into his mouth. He chewed, swallowed, and smiled brightly. Evelyn, this is absolutely phenomenal, he said, reaching for his wine glass. You outdid yourself. I sat there, my own food untouched, watching him eat. I watched him consume bite after bite of the very thing that should be killing him. There was no coughing. There was no redness creeping up his neck. There was no desperate scramble for an adrenaline injector. Just a man from Brooklyn enjoying a free, luxury dinner. As I watched him enthusiastically wipe his plate clean with a piece of garlic bread, the last lingering, pathetic shred of denial inside my heart completely withered and died. Part of me, the irrational, broken part of a wife who loved her husband, had secretly hoped Penelope was wrong. Had hoped Gemma's software was glitching. Had hoped there was some insane, convoluted explanation that would make everything okay. But watching this stranger eat this meal, the reality cemented itself in my brain. My husband was gone. He was in Rome with a 26-year-old pharmaceutical rep, spending the money I had helped him build, laughing at my stupidity. He had left me alone in an apartment with a paid imposter, assuming I was too blind and too docile to ever notice the difference. I smiled back at Declan, raising my wine glass in a silent toast. I am so glad you like it, I said softly. The grief was gone entirely now. It had been replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm rage. Harrison had orchestrated a financial and emotional murder. But he forgot the cardinal rule of forensic accounting: every crime leaves a paper trail, and every criminal makes a mistake. His mistake was leaving me with access to his server network, assuming I wouldn't look. I finished my wine, already formulating the architecture of the digital trap I was going to build. Harrison wanted to play a game of deception and offshore accounts. I was going to show him exactly why corporate billionaires paid me thousands of dollars an hour to destroy their enemies. Thank you for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much for your support. That night, I lay in bed beside a stranger, my skin crawling every time the duvet shifted. Declan's breathing was heavy and rhythmic, the sound of a man with a clear conscience, or, more likely, a man who had been paid enough to sleep through his own lies. I waited until the digital clock on the nightstand read 2:15 in the morning. I slipped out from under the covers with the agonizingly slow movements of someone defusing a bomb. I didn't go for his phone. Gemma was already monitoring that. I went for his briefcase. It sat in the corner of the room, a vintage leather bag that the real Harrison had owned for years. It was a prop now. I carried it into the master bathroom, locked the door, and turned on the small vanity light. My hands were shaking, but my forensic instincts were screaming for me to focus. I used a small tension wrench from my desk to click the lock open. At first glance, it looked like Harrison's life. There were folders on mergers and acquisitions, a few business cards for high-end steakhouses, and a stray receipt for a dry cleaner in Midtown. But I knew how to look for the hidden seams. I pressed my fingers along the interior lining until I felt the slight, unnatural stiffness of a false bottom. I pulled it back and my heart stopped. Tucked inside was a thick, spiral-bound notebook. I opened the first page and felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grab the edge of the sink. It wasn't a business journal. It was a character study. In Harrison's elegant, slanted handwriting, there were pages and pages of notes dedicated to me. Evelyn's morning routine, the first page began. 1 sugar, no cream. She prefers the white ceramic mug with the chipped handle. Do not use the blue ones. They make her think of her mother's old kitchen. If she looks stressed, do not ask what's wrong. Just make Earl Grey tea and leave it on her desk. She hates being hovered over. I flipped the page, my eyes stinging. Anniversary, October 15. She expects flowers but will pretend she doesn't. Buy peonies, specifically the pale pink ones from the shop on Bleecker Street. Mention the summer we spent in Maine if the conversation lags. It went on for dozens of pages. My husband had transcribed my soul into a manual for a hired actor. He had documented my grief over my father's death, noting it as a sensitive subject to be used to build intimacy. He had recorded the exact way I laughed when I was tired, the phrases I used when I was annoyed, and even the way I liked the pillows arranged. Our entire 7-year history had been reduced to bullet points. My marriage wasn't a partnership to Harrison. It was a script he was tired of performing, so he'd outsourced the role to a professional. At the very bottom of the last page, there was a note in a different, hurried handwriting, likely Declan's. 3 months maximum, it read. Maintain cover until the final transfer is complete. Transfer of what? I knew the $1,300,000 was just the beginning. I pulled out my encrypted phone and photographed every single page. My hands were steady now, fueled by a cold, crystalline fury. Every word on those pages was a violation, a digital and emotional rape of our shared history. Harrison hadn't just stolen our money, he had tried to steal my reality. I tucked the notebook back into the hidden compartment, locked the briefcase, and returned it to the corner of the bedroom. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the city lights, waiting for the sun to rise so I could begin the next phase of his destruction. Sunday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. I told Declan I had an emergency at the office, a common enough occurrence in my line of work, and drove out to New Jersey. I needed to see my mother. She lived in a high-end assisted living facility, a place that cost $9,000 a month, paid for by the life insurance policy my father had left behind. The facility was quiet, smelling of floor wax and lilies. My mother was sitting by the window in her room, her eyes cloudy with the fog of dementia. When she saw me, a small spark of recognition lit up her face. "Evelyn," she whispered, her hand trembling as I took it. "You missed him. He was just here." I froze. "Who is here, Mom?" "Harrison," she said, her voice unusually clear. "He came on Thursday. We had pudding. He's such a good boy, Evelyn. He wanted to make sure I was protected. He asked about the Northwest Mutual policy." My blood turned to ice. My father had been a secretive man, a hobbyist coin collector who had hidden various assets throughout his life. After he died, I had found one primary policy, but I'd always suspected there was another. Harrison had been the one to help me settle the estate. I walked out to the nurse's station, my heart hammering against my ribs. I asked Nancy, the floor director, to see the visitor log for the past month. She pulled up the digital archive on her tablet. We scrolled through Thursday after Thursday. There was no entry for Harrison Mercer. "That's impossible," Nancy said, looking confused. "I remember seeing him. He brought her those lemon drops she likes. He was here for almost an hour." I asked her to show me the physical sign-in sheets, the ones the guests actually signed before the staff entered them into the computer. She led me to a back office and pulled a dusty binder from the shelf. We found the page for August 15. The lines were numbered. Line 24 was blank. Line 25 was a woman visiting her sister. But there was a visible gap, a space where a signature had been and then vanished. Someone has edited the digital records, I realized. And the physical sheet? I looked closer. You could see the faint indentations in the paper where a pen had pressed down. Harrison had signed it, and then someone, likely a contact he had in the facility's IT department or a very skilled hacker, had wiped the digital trail. I asked Nancy to pull up the raw security footage from the lobby for that Thursday. We watched the screen. At 2:47 in the afternoon, there he was. The real Harrison. He wasn't wearing his work suit. He was in a casual navy jacket. He signed the book, chatted with the receptionist, and walked toward my mother's wing. He had spent an hour mining a woman with dementia for financial secrets. He wanted to find my father's hidden coin collection and the second insurance policy. He was scouring my family for every last cent before he cut ties. I stood in that hallway, looking at the graining footage of the man I had loved, and I felt a door in my heart slam shut and lock. There was no room left for grief. There was only the mission. I thanked Nancy, saved a copy of the footage to my phone, and walked out into the Jersey rain. Harrison thought he was being thorough. He thought he was the smartest man in the room because he knew how to hide his tracks. But he had made the one mistake all arrogant men make. He assumed the person he was stealing from was too weak to fight back. He had targeted my mother. That was the final line. Now, I wasn't just going to audit him. I was going to bury him. By Sunday afternoon, I was back in Manhattan, sitting in a dim corner of a quiet bistro with Madeline. She was one of the top white-collar defense attorneys in the city and a woman who didn't flinch at anything. I laid out the notebook, the financial traces, and the nursing home footage. Madeline didn't say a word for 5 minutes. She just flipped through the pages of Harrison's character study, her jaw tightening with every sentence. "Evelyn, this is beyond a simple divorce," she said, her voice low and sharp. "This is professional-grade identity theft and financial fraud. But we have a massive problem." I knew what she was going to say. "Because Harrison used my passwords and my biometric data, everything looks authorized." "Exactly," Madeline nodded. "If we go to the police now, Harrison's lawyers will claim you were a co-conspirator. They will say you helped him move the money and now you're trying to frame him because of the affair. And the corporate data? That's the real kicker." She pointed to a login report Gemma had pulled. "Harrison had accessed my firm's server 3 times in the last week while I was asleep. He had downloaded the audit files for 3 major pharmaceutical companies, clients I was currently investigating for price fixing." "He's selling the data," I whispered. "He's doing more than that," Madeline said. "He's facilitating insider trading for Cassidy's hedge fund contacts. Millions of dollars are moving based on the information he stole using your credentials. If this breaks the wrong way, the SEC won't care that your husband was a sociopath. They will put you in a cage right next to him." The weight of the situation finally hit me. I wasn't just losing my marriage and my money. I was facing the total destruction of my career and my freedom. Harrison hadn't just built a decoy to hide his affair. He had built a fall girl. He was going to disappear with the cash, leave the country, and let the federal government hammer me for the crimes he committed in my name. Penelope's flight was scheduled to land back in New York on Monday evening. But more importantly, her next route, the one Harrison was likely on, was a connecting flight from Rome to Zurich on Tuesday morning. Switzerland. A place where money goes to become invisible. "We have 36 hours, I said, looking at Madeline. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking Harrison thinks he's playing a game of chess," I said, standing up. "But I'm an accountant. I don't play games. I balance the books. And right now, Harrison Mercer is carrying a debt he can never repay." I left the restaurant and called Gemma. I needed her to get me the IP addresses for every server Harrison had accessed in the last 48 hours. I spent the rest of Sunday night in my office, not looking at spreadsheets, but writing code. I was building a digital guillotine. It was a sophisticated piece of malware, a financial virus disguised as a routine quarterly investment review. I knew Harrison's habits better than his actor did. I knew that before he made his final move in Switzerland, he would log into our shared cloud drive one last time to make sure I hadn't changed anything. The virus was elegant. It wouldn't delete anything. It wouldn't even change the numbers. Instead, it was designed to trigger the moment it was accessed from an international IP address. When activated, it would broadcast a high-priority alert to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the SEC's enforcement branch, and the compliance departments of every major bank involved in his shell companies. It would be a digital flare, lighting up his entire hidden empire for the world to see. I finished the code at 4 in the morning. I titled the file Q3 Investment Review and Tax Documents. It was the perfect bait. Now, I just had to wait for the fish to bite. Monday morning was a blur of calculated movements. I returned to the apartment, acting the part of the busy executive. Declan was there, lounging in Harrison's silk robe, reading the Wall Street Journal. The irony was almost unbearable. I sat at the dining table with my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I wasn't working on client files. I was finalizing the transmission protocols for my virus. I had embedded the code into the metadata of the PDF files. To Harrison, it would look like a standard document he had seen 1,000 times. But the second he opened it in Rome, he would be signing his own arrest warrant. I also needed to make sure the evidence on this end was undeniable. I called Robert Steinberg. He was the CEO of Steinberg Industries, a man worth $5 billion and Harrison's most prestigious client. "Robert," I said, my voice dripping with professional concern. "I hate to bother you on a Monday, but I was doing some routine cross-referencing on adjacent accounts, and I noticed a few irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" Robert asked, his voice immediately sharpening. "Nothing I can confirm yet," I lied smoothly. "Probably just a clerical error in the quarterly reporting. But I wanted to give you a heads up. I'll have a full report by tomorrow morning." I did the same for 2 other major firms. I wasn't giving them enough to act, but I was planting the seeds of an internal audit. I was making sure that when the FBI arrived, they wouldn't just have my word, they would have 3 of the most powerful CEOs in the country demanding answers. While I worked, I watched Declan. He was good, I had to give him that. He had the Harrison smile down to a science. But now that I knew he was an actor, every gesture felt like a bad high school play. I watched him check his watch, the gold Rolex I had given Harrison for his 35th birthday. "Are we still on for that anniversary breakfast tomorrow?" Declan asked, looking up from his paper. "You seemed really excited about it." I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that he mistook for affection. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. "It's going to be a morning none of us will ever forget." I spent the afternoon with Gemma in a van parked 3 blocks from the apartment. We were monitoring the cloud drive. We watched as a login attempt was made from a luxury hotel in Rome. "He's there," Gemma whispered, pointing to the glowing map on her screen. The cursor hovered over the Q3 investment review file. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Come on, Harrison. Open it. You know you want to see the numbers one last time." The screen flickered. The file was accessed. The virus didn't make a sound. There were no flashing red lights. But on Gemma's monitor, we watched a series of automated scripts begin to run. Encrypted packets of data were being sent to 5 different federal agencies. The trap was set. The $47 million Harrison had moved through his various shell companies was now being tracked in real time by the government's most aggressive forensic units. "He thinks he's winning," I said, leaning back in the van's cramped seat. "He's probably ordering a $500 bottle of wine right now to celebrate." "He has no idea the door just locked behind him," Gemma agreed. I checked the time. It was 6 o'clock. Penelope was landing at JFK. I sent her a 1-word text, "Proceed." The stage was set for the final act. I drove back to the apartment, where Declan was waiting to play the role of the devoted husband one last time. I was going to give him the performance of a lifetime. Monday night dinner was a quiet, eerie affair. Declan had ordered Thai food, something the real Harrison always complained made the apartment smell for days. I didn't say a word. I just watched him eat, my mind running through the final logistics of the next 12 hours. "You know," I said, swirling the wine in my glass, "I was thinking about our honeymoon today." Declan paused, a piece of chicken sauté halfway to his mouth. "Oh yeah?" I nodded, leaning forward with a look of feigned nostalgia. "That tiny tavern in Astoria. Remember? The one where we sat on those rickety wooden chairs and watched the sunset over the water. We danced to that old accordion player until 3 in the morning. You told me it was the most romantic night of your life." I watched him closely. The real Harrison and I had honeymooned in Santorini, Greece. There is an Astoria in Queens, but we had never been there together, and we certainly hadn't danced to an accordion player in a tavern. Declan's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, the classic actor's panic when they forget a line. Then he recovered. He gave me a warm, knowing smile. "How could I forget?" he said smoothly. "The grilled octopus was incredible. I still think about that night whenever things get too stressful at work." I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated disgust. He was so confident in his deception that he didn't even realize he had just failed the ultimate test. He was agreeing to a memory that didn't exist, confirming the total fraudulency of his presence in my home. It was perfect, I whispered, my voice thick with real emotion, not for him, but for the loss of the man I thought I knew. I stood up and walked behind him, placing my hands on his shoulders. He leaned back into me, completely unaware that the woman touching him was his executioner. About tomorrow morning, I said, my voice low and steady. I want to make sure it's a big surprise. I want everyone to see how successful we are. I need you to send a follow-up email to the clients. Tell them it's an emergency strategy briefing disguised as a breakfast. Make it sound exclusive. Tell them their presence is non-negotiable. Declan frowned slightly. An emergency briefing? Won't that make them nervous? I squeezed his shoulders. That's the point. It makes them feel important. Harrison always says the best deals are made when people are slightly on edge. He chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. You're right. That does sound like me. I'll send the invites now. I watched him type the emails on Harrison's laptop. He sent them to Robert Steinberg, Jennifer Wu, and David Martinez, the three biggest power players in Harrison's world. He was inviting the very witnesses who would ensure Harrison could never work in this city again. When he was done, I kissed the top of his head. Get some sleep, Harrison, I said, using the name like a curse. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. I went to the guest room, claiming I had a few more work emails to finish. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the encrypted phone. Penelope had sent a photo. It was a grainy shot taken through a window at a high-end restaurant in Rome. Harrison and Cassidy were laughing, clinking glasses of red wine. Harrison looked younger, freer, as if he had already shed the skin of our marriage and moved on. I looked at my watch. It was midnight. In 8 hours, the world would know exactly who Harrison Mercer was. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in 4 days, I slept. Tuesday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a surgical strike. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell began to ring. Robert Steinberg arrived first, looking annoyed but curious, followed by Jennifer Wu and David Martinez. Within 20 minutes, my living room was filled with the most powerful financial minds in Manhattan. Declan was in full Harrison mode, wearing a tailored navy suit, floating through the room with a glass of orange juice, making effortless small talk. He was enjoying the role, basking in the reflected power of the men and women in the room. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the clock. 7:58. Then it happened. The sound wasn't a knock. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding against the front door that shook the entire apartment. Federal agents. Open up. The room went deathly silent. Every head turned toward the door. I saw Declan's face go from confident to chalk white in 3 seconds. I walked over and opened the door. 6 FBI agents in tactical vests swarmed into the room, led by a woman with steel gray hair and an expression that made Robert Steinberg look like an amateur. Agent Sarah Brennan, FBI Financial Crimes, she announced, holding up her badge. We have a warrant for the arrest of Harrison Mercer for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. She turned her gaze toward Declan. That's me, he stammered, his British accent slipping, replaced by the flat, desperate tones of a man from Queens. I'm not. I want to cooperate. The gathered executives gasped. David Martinez actually dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the hardwood. Mr. Webb, Agent Brennan said, using Declan's real name. You are under arrest. As they cuffed him, Declan looked at me, his eyes wide with terror and a strange kind of gratitude. The storage unit, he whispered. Queens Boulevard. Unit 447. Everything is there. The instructions, the recordings. Please, tell them I didn't know about the money. While they led Declan out, my laptop on the dining table chimed. I turned the screen toward the room. I want you all to see this, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. On the screen, the financial virus was displaying its final report. We watched in real time as $47 million in stolen assets were frozen in accounts across 3 continents. At the same time, a news alert popped up on the sidebar. Breaking news. Italian authorities, acting on an international warrant, have detained American investment banker Harrison Mercer and an associate, Cassidy Vale, at Leonardo da Vinci Airport in Rome. The silence in the room was absolute. Robert Steinberg walked over to me, looking at the screen, then back at me. "You set this up," he said, his voice hushed with a mixture of shock and profound respect. I nodded, feeling a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. "He thought he could use my life as a prop," I said. "He forgot that in my world, every debt eventually comes due." 6 months later, I was standing in a new office space in the Flatiron district. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue, and a simple brass nameplate on the door read, "Evelyn Chin, Forensic Consulting." I wasn't investigating price fixing for billionaires anymore. I had found a new niche. My waiting list was full of women, surgeons, CEOs, and heiresses who suspected their realities were being edited. I was helping them find the invisible strings before their lives were pulled out from under them. The divorce had been finalized in record time. Given the federal indictment and the overwhelming evidence of fraud, Harrison had no leverage. He was currently sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting trial for a list of crimes that would likely keep him behind bars until I was a grandmother. Cassidy had taken a plea deal, testifying against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. My phone buzzed. A text from Penelope, "Giovanni's at 7. My treat." I smiled. My sister and I were closer than ever. The trauma had forged a bond that no script could ever replicate. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a small envelope that had been slipped under my door. It was postmarked from Ohio. I opened it and found a short, handwritten note and a single photograph. "Dear Evelyn," the note began. "I'm teaching acting classes at a community college here now. It's honest work. I tell my students that some roles aren't worth the paycheck. I found this in the storage unit and thought you should have it. I am truly sorry for my part in his play. Sincerely, Marcus Webb." I pulled out the photograph. It was from our wedding day. Harrison and I were cutting the cake, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. We looked genuinely, deliriously happy. I studied the woman in the photo. She looked younger, softer, her eyes full of a trust that had once felt like an anchor. I realized then that I didn't hate her. I didn't even pity her. I just didn't recognize her anymore. I took the photograph, walked over to the paper shredder in the corner of my office, and fed it into the blades. I watched as our 7 years were turned into thin strips of white confetti. I picked up my bag, turned off the lights, and walked out into the Manhattan evening. The city was loud, chaotic, and beautifully real. I didn't know what the next 7 years would hold, and for the first time in my life, I was perfectly okay with that. I had balanced the books. My life was finally in the black. Am I wrong for feeling entirely zero sympathy for the man who tried to erase my existence, even as he faces decades in a federal cell? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this story of betrayal and calculated justice. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another gripping story. See you in the next one.